Honey the Sweet Fairy. The Party Fairies. Honey the Sweet Fairy can't make any new sweets without her magic party bag of fairy dust. Can Rachel and Kirsty save it from the goblin so Honey can help the party fizz again? There's a magic party bag in each Rainbow Magic story. Help the girls to find them all and keep them safe for the fairies. Rainbow Magic, the Party Fairies. Honey the Sweet Fairy by Daisy Meadows. Illustrated by Georgie Ripper. And here's the map. Jack Frost. Oh, actually, it's not Jack Frost's spell, it's the invitation. And here's the content. And we're on to Chapter 1. A trip to the sweet shop. It was a lovely sunny day, and Mr. and Mrs. Tate had set lunch outside in the garden. As Kirsty and her best friend Rachel Walker sat down to eat, Mrs. Tate suddenly groaned aloud. "I knew there was something else I meant to get from the shops this morning," she cried. "Grand toffees! I promised I'd take her some this evening, and I completely forgot to buy them." Kirsty put down her sandwich. "Don't worry, Mum. We'll go to Mrs. Twist's sweet shop after lunch for you," she suggested. She glanced at Rachel. "What do you think?" "Sure," Rachel said. "I've always got time to go to the sweet shop." The two girls smiled at each other. Rachel was staying with the Tates for a whole week. She and Kirsty had met one summer holiday, and they'd been good friends ever since. Somehow, whenever the pair of them got together, they'd always seem to have the most wonderful adventures. Fairy adventures. "That reminds me," Mr. Tate said. "I saw in the local newspaper that Mrs. Twist is retiring. Her daughter's taking over the sweet shop from tomorrow. As this is her last day, Mrs. Twist is throwing a party for her customers." He winked at Kirsty and Rachel. "I read something about there being plenty of free sweets for us to grabs too." Kirsty nudged Rachel at once. "Sweets and a party?" she repeated. "How exciting!" "We love parties," Rachel agreed with a grin. The two friends shared a secret. They had been busy all week helping the party fairies of Fairyland. The fairies were preparing for a surprise celebration for the Fairy King and Queen's 1000th Jubilee. But wicked Jack Frost had plans for his own rival party. All week he had been sending his goblins into the human world to disturb people's parties. Then, whenever a party fairy zoomed in to save the day, a goblin would try to snatch her magical party bag and take it to Jack Frost. Kirsty and Rachel had been helping the party fairies outwit the goblins, but they knew their work wasn't over yet. Not if Jack Frost had anything to do with it. After lunch, Mrs. Tate gave the girls some money for the toffees, and they set out for the sweet shop. As they turned into the high street, they saw that a few children were already clustered outside Mrs. Twist's shop. But as they drew near, Kirsty and Rachel realised that something was wrong. Mrs. Twist's sweet shop. Open! A boy was pulling a feat as he licked a lollipop, and one little girl started to cry. "These sweets taste funny," she wailed. Kirsty and Rachel went into the shop, wondering what was going on. The tiny shop looked very festive. Colourful balloons hung from the ceiling, and party streamers were twisted around the big jars of sweets that lined the shelves. Mrs. Twist stood behind the counter as usual, but Kirsty noticed that she didn't look her normal, cheerful self. "Hello, Mrs. Twist," Kirsty called. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Twist shook her head sadly. Not really, she replied. It's my last day, and I was hoping to have a wonderful party, but all my sweets are spoiled. Oh, she looks sad. And we're on to the second chapter, A Sweet Surprise. As Kirsty and Rachel looked around, they could see what Mrs. Twist meant. The pineapple chunks that she was trying to shake from the jar had become one big sticky lump. The chocolate bars were soft and soggy, as if they'd been lying in the sun, and the sherbet was fizzing so fiercely it made everyone sneeze. Rachel nudged Kirsty. Look, she said in a low voice, pointing at one of the shelves. Kirsty looked and saw a box of pink sugar mice, all with their paws over their eyes as if they were scared of something. The jelly babies looked worried too. They were all holding hands. And, to Kirsty's surprise, a group of jelly snakes in a jar were wriggling crossly and actually hissing. She quickly pushed the jar of snakes to the back of the shelf before anyone else noticed. Something very weird is going on, Rachel whispered, as the two friends heard a low grumbling hum start up from a jar of stripy humbugs. Kirsty nodded. It's got to be goblin mischief, she whispered back. Mrs. Twist put down the jar of pineapple cubes and pulled out a tray of chocolates instead. Then she sighed in dismay. Oh no! What's happened to these? Rachel and Kirsty went over to look. Oh, I coloured in this page. I loved colouring in the pages when I was younger. The sweets had all melted onto the tray, and right in the middle was a big hollow where someone had pressed into the soft chocolate. Rachel nudged Kirsty. She had immediately recognised the shape in the melted chocolate. It was a goblin footprint. The girls exchanged glances, and Kirsty promptly peered down at the floor. If the goblins got the chocolate all over one foot, she muttered to Rachel, he'll have left footprints everywhere. Rachel added in a low voice. Then she pointed down at the floor. Just like those. The girls quickly slipped away from the shop counter to follow the trail of chocolatey footprints. They seemed to lead to a door at the back of the shop. This is the door to Mrs. Twist's stockroom, Kirsty whispered to her friend. We can't just sneak in there without asking. Rachel bit her lip. Well, we can't just say, excuse me, Mrs. Twist, but we think there might be a goblin in your stockroom either. We'll... Crash! Both girls jumped as they heard a loud noise from the other side of the door. Oh no, it sounds like goblins wreaking havoc in there, Rachel hissed. Before Kirsty could reply, she heard Mrs. Twist saying, This is no good. I can't give people these spoiled sweets. I'll give some new ones from the stockroom. No, Kirsty cried hurtantly. She couldn't let Mrs. Twist go in there, not with a sneaky goblin on the loose. She faltered as Mrs. Twist looked at her in surprise. You can't leave the shop, Mrs. Twist. Rachel and I will fetch the sweets for you. Mrs. Twist smiled. Thank you, dear, she said gratefully. Bring out anything you like the look of. Kirsty nodded and cautiously pushed open the stockroom door. As both girls peeped into the room, they gasped in horror. Bottles and jars had been knocked over, and there were sweets scattered all across the floor. But worst of all, there was a tiny fairy struggling desperately to hang onto her magical party bag as a grinning goblin fought to tug it out of her hand. It's Honey the Sweet Fairy, cried Kirsty, and she's in trouble. Oh no, there's Honey with a mean goblin. We're on to the third chapter. Goblin Trouble. Kirsty and Rachel slipped inside the stockroom at once and shut the door behind them. Honey was wearing a pale yellow dress and little sherbet yellow shoes. Her golden brown ponytail swung madly to and fro as she tried to save her party bag. "Oh, girls, please help me," she cried as she saw the friends. "We certainly will," Rachel called back fiercely. Her gaze fell on a large jar of sweets. "Gobstoppers!" she exclaimed happily, unscrewing the lid. "Over here, Kirsty." Both girls took handfuls of the gobstoppers and began pelting the goblins with the hard, round sweets. "Ouch!" yelped the goblin as a gobstopper bounced off his long nose. He threw up his arms to protect his face and let go of the party bag, but he released it so suddenly that Honey shot backward into one of the shelves. All the breath was knocked out of her and she dropped her precious party bag. Poor Honey. "Oh no!" gasped Honey as the shimmering gold fairy dust tumbled out of the bag in a sparkling shower. The girls and Honey rushed to scoop up the tiny sweet-shaped sparkles, but the goblin was already there, grabbing great glittering handfuls. "Just what Jack Frost wanted!" he gloated, stuffing it into his pocket. "Now I've got this fairy dust, his party bag will be better than ever." "Oh no, it won't!" Kirsty shouted, grabbing a striped candy cane from the floor. Rachel did the same, and the two girls started poking the goblin in the ribs with them. "Ouch! Ah, tee!" The goblin giggled helplessly as the canes tickled him. "Stop it! Stop!" The goblin was laughing so hard that he lost his balance. He stumbled and skidded on the gobstoppers that were all over the floor. "Whoa!" he cried, his arms failing, and then, "Ow!" he shouted as he fell over. All of the fairy dust bounced out of his pocket as he landed and began vanishing before his eyes. The goblin stretched out a gnarly green hand to grab it again, but Honey was too quick for him. She waved her wand at the candy canes and muttered some magic words. Kirsty and Rachel watched in delight as all the candy canes on the floor started to shimmer with a golden glow. Then they leaped up and marched smartly over to the goblin. Before he could get his hands on any of the vanishing fairy dust, the striped canes began herding him across the room. "Hey!" protested the goblin as the canes pushed him backwards. "Stop that!" Honey's magic was too strong for him. The grumbling goblin marched right out of the back door of the shop by the dancing candy canes. "That got rid of him," Rachel laughed as the door swung behind the goblin. "Phew!" Honey sighed with relief, smiling at the girls. Then she fluttered down to look at her party bag, and the smile slipped from her face. "Oh dear!" she cried. The fairy dust had all disappeared, and the bag was empty. "Oh, Honey looks so sad." Kirsty glanced around the stockroom. It was a terrible mess. There were sweets all over the floor and jars overturned on every shelf. "We'd better tidy this up before Mrs. Twist sees it," she said anxiously. "It's going to take us ages." "If only I had some fairy dust, I could magic everything to rights," Honey cried. "But that horrible goblin made me spill it all." The girls came to Mrs. Twist's voice from the shop. "Is everything all right in there?" Yes, we're just coming," Kirsty called back quickly. The girls looked at each other in panic. They could hear the shop being jingled as more customers came in for sweets. What were they going to do?